Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are welcoming the owner of For Papa's Sake Home Care, Becky Reel. Welcome, Becky.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, Becky, let's start off by having you share a little bit about who you are and your background.
Sure. So I have a background in marketing and sales, worked in Fortune 500 companies for about 15 years until I joined For Papa's Sake full-time about 7 years ago. For Papa's Sake is my family's business that we started over 13 years ago after my grandfather, who I called Papa, had a tragic end of life in a nursing home. So this gave me the opportunity to actually do something for our community, be able to help keep my grandfather's legacy alive, and to do more than just a job. And it's been the most fulfilling thing I've ever done in my career.
Wonderful. So what would you say makes For Papa's Sake a boutique home care service rather than just a home care service? What's the differentiation between those two?
Yeah. So when we started, we knew we wanted to be more than just an agency. There's hundreds of agencies just in our area, in the Chicago area, but we knew we were different. We knew that having the story behind why we started really was our main driver. And so we positions ourselves as a boutique agency because we are very hands-on. We are very much quality over quantity. And that really has helped us leverage that boutique approach. That means we are in constant contact with our families, with our caregivers. Any little detail will not be missed. And that really sets us apart. Even the little things that we can do for clients that are really not in the scope of what we normally do. But if we can make something happen, we will for our clients and our caregivers.
And I think that's really important. That's one of the things I think that separates, family owned or individually owned services of any sort of industry, especially in home care though, because we're dealing with people's loved ones and, that privilege and trust that they place in us and you to care for their loved ones is an enormous trust. It's an enormous trust. And what would be examples of the little things that you're able to do For Papa's Sake that maybe, say, a franchise may not be able to do?
Sure. I mean, it's little things. Birthdays for our clients, we try to recognize, whether they prefer a coffee cake versus a cupcake from a certain bakery. If they prefer Starbucks over Dunkin' Donuts, those little details really do go a long way with clients. And this is the same with our caregivers. We really do feel our caregivers should get just as much customer service as our clients. They're the ones doing the hard work. Mm-hmm. So those little details, little things like if the client last minute needs their dog walked because there's an emergency on their side, someone from my office can run over there and take care of it. At the end of the day, this is a family. This is a human being. Emergencies happen and we need to be able to pivot and do what we can to help them maintain their everyday life, and whatever we can do to take whatever we can off their plate, we will do. But those little details do matter when it comes to that everyday life and that boutique approach.
Okay. And you mentioned this, and I think it's important, and I want to have you explain what you mean by quality over quantity.
Yep. So at the end of the day, we can't make everybody happy. We cannot be the answer for every single family. And it's taken us some time to realize that. So what we've really done is we've defined who we are as an agency and what we do really well as an agency. And that includes only serving a small population of the northwest suburbs of Chicago. We used to go far out to Chicago and suburbs that were, over an hour away. And while we can do it, were we providing the best in class service? We weren't. Okay. We were stretching ourselves too thin. So we decided to really focus on the quality aspect over the amount of clients we serve. So we will cap ourselves at a certain amount if we start to feel stretched. We will turn down clients if they're outside of our ideal service area that we think if we don't feel like we can give them that stellar service, then we will refer them out. And we do refer out probably over half the amount of calls we get for services.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it's not about the money. It's not about the revenue. It's about making sure this family is getting the right service at the right time. And if we can't do it, I don't want to be the reason they have to wait.
Yeah, and I've had a doctor tell me once, if I can't help you, I'm not going to hurt you, right? And I think that's where the quality over quantity really plays a role, because you don't want to diminish your expectations and your standards just to take on a new client. And I think that's really important, where I think, some businesses may not have that approach, right? It's how many can I get and how fast can we get them? And then their standards get lowered and you kind of start just accepting it because, again, you're taking on, more clients, more business, and you have to meet those needs. And they may not be able to meet your standards, though. What do you think? And, this is really great that you're in Illinois, and I'll tell you why. We just had the editor of McKnight's home care news on yesterday, and a good part of the discussion was about the licensing and certifications and the non-licensing and the non-certifications between all the states, right? I think there's 36 states that require licensing, and there's 14, unfortunately, that don't. And we happen to be in a state that doesn't. And unfortunately, a lot of families, they don't know what they don't know when it comes to looking for these types of services. Help differentiate what you have found to be some of the biggest misnomers or misconceptions about what home care is and what it isn't.
So, and the licensing is such an important, the fact that we are a licensed agency gives us so much comfort to families. And I have this conversation with families all the time. If I can't help them, I at least will guide them into what you should be asking and what you should be looking for with other agencies if I can't help you. But I think a misconception that I always tell families is that caregivers are human beings. They're not sitting in a room waiting to be called to go to work. And we have to set that expectation for families and for caregivers, but for families that calls and say, I want a caregiver tomorrow. Here's the schedule I want. There are people, but is that person going to be the best person for your loved one, for your mom, for your dad? There's not a room where they're sitting there waiting to be called. They have families, they have lives, they have other jobs. And so sometimes it takes a little bit of time to either move things around or make it happen. And then I also think setting expectations for what an ideal schedule is going to look like and opening up their mind to, if you come into the situation saying, I only want Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m., no flexibility. That's fine. If that's what your needs are, then absolutely. But you're limiting the pool of people that we might be able to contact that might be a better fit because you're being very siloed into what you need. So sometimes I think the misconception is you don't need to be flexible from a client standpoint, but you do because it's about the person. It's about their experience level. It's about their personality. It's about where they live because they're going to have to commute there. And even before gas prices were crazy, it still wasn't a cheap commodity for our caregivers. And so you need to explain all of these factors in the holistic view of how we're staffing, why we're staffing.
Right. And one of the things we find, and I just want to clarify in case people aren't aware of what we're meaning when we say licensing and credentialed. So Michigan, there's business licensing, there's credentials that the companies can require of their employees and staff, and they background checks and screenings and training and orientation, but there's no regulation by the Department of Health and Human Services or the counties where you have to go through a entirely different credentialing process. And what we've encountered quite often, and sadly, is, again, families aren't expected to know what they don't know. and they don't know when they call some flyer they find at the grocery store, or, a friend of a friend does home care. That doesn't necessarily mean they're qualified. They're going to have the insulation, the workman's comp, the liability insurance, the bonding, doing background checks, drug screening, training, orientation, and that person coming in may have no prior experience at all. And we're hoping, in the being in a non-licensed state, that's going to change at some point, because I can't tell you how many families we've encountered that there's either a tragic situation either for the person that was being cared for, or the employee got injured, and then the family's now fully responsible, or vice versa. That person you hired is now fully responsible. And like we explain to families also, especially for the families that have longer hours and more days, that person you're hiring privately may not have any backup to send if they get sick or they go on vacation or they have an emergency. And then that family's right back into, that beginning stage of, what are we going to do? We need to find help for mom or dad.
So to that end, with the licensing, when people come to us and they don't know what they don't know, and you can tell they're flustered, we were their first stop. It's our job, even if they become a client even if they're not going to be in our area, we know we can't help them. It's our job to educate them.
Right.
And I will always go into, well, here's the differences between private caregiving, so you hire them directly, or through an agency. And there's pros and cons to both. Sure. And private is not always the wrong way to go. It might financially be the best option for that family, but it's my job to educate them on the pros and cons, the good and the bad with both. But usually it does come down to, when you're dealing with a licensed agency, ultimately you're hiring us to do the work. And so you, as the spouse or the child,
peace of mind,
your job is to go spend time with your mom and be that kid, versus the caregiver, the scheduler, and all those things. Let us take care of the liability insurance, the workers' comp insurance, taxes, paying. If God forbid there's an emergency, let us deal with having a backup and figure that out for you. Your job is to go be spending time with your loved one. And that's my job, to help educate the families on the differences between the two.
And so now that we're talking about, home care, why don't you share with our viewers and listeners what types of services are generally covered or provided by home care services?
Sure. So for us, as we're a non-medical agency, which means we can't do anything invasive. We can't touch medication. We can't do anything with needles. But really the scope, every client is different. This is also part of being a boutique agency, is every care plan is very customized. But we can do everything from companionship, helping with doctor's appointments, transportation assistance, errands, grocery shopping, all the way up to personal care, so showering, bathing, grooming. And we do help with hospice support. So we have to be very careful, though, with the term hospice, because we're non-medical and we're not a hospice provider. However, we will partner with a hospice company to provide them that support. And that's going to be to help that person stay comfortable, to feel safe, and to be taken care of when hospice is not there.
Right. And I know one of the things we encounter, not often, but maybe every so often, is where, one of the misperceptions we encounter is, well, we have home health care right now, or we have hospice right now, so we can't use home care. And that's actually quite the opposite. Home care is a great support for hospice services and for the home health care services, because they're not able to be in the home for an extended period of time. Some hospice providers, depending on their patient, they might call in and just check in and not even physically stop by unless they're needed to. And so that family or that person needs that support for their ADLs and their nutrition, and even just companionship, especially, if they're living alone and they're isolated and their children work or their children live long distances. Having that extra support, companionship, has numerous benefits. It's not just having a person to visit, it's a person to listen to, and they might, talk about current events or watch a movie with you, just so you don't feel alone and isolated. And that can have a lot of therapeutic support and benefit.
Absolutely. We always, as long as it's appropriate, we always will recommend partnering with a palliative care or hospice provider. For us, when the client gets to be a more high level client, for us, it's extra support for us, for our caregivers too. Right. If we're going to be there longer periods of time, where the hospice company might pop in once, twice a week to help with the ADLs or to check on medication. But what if things change while the caregiver's there and they're going to be those eyes, the
Right.
extra eyes to the medical agency, whether it's home health, palliative care, or hospice. So we do work closely with those partners of ours to make sure that the clients are getting consistent, reliable care.
Absolutely. And so why do you think it's important for families and family caregivers to know that these types of services exist?
It's one of those things they just don't know what they don't know. A lot of times they call us thinking they need home health. And so again, it's our job to educate them on that difference for them. But I think it's important for them because they'll have that extra support. We just had a family, they've been with us for almost 7 years, a family that became very close to our team here. And it was a hard client for us to let go of because she just passed. But we really pushed for them to have that palliative care and ultimately hospice because they just didn't know. They didn't
Right.
know which way to go. And while we can help and make recommendations on the medical side, we're non-medical. So you really have to look to that medical expert.
Right.
And it gave them such peace of mind because we were there 24/7. And that way the daughter was able to go spend time with her parents and not worry so much. But I
Right.
think it's again, people just don't know the difference. Home health, home care, they're very different.
And quite often we will get calls, and I'm going to assume you will as well, that they're convinced that Medicare pays for it, and that's where that confusion between home health and home care come in. And it's difficult because they believe it, and it's not their fault, and you have to walk them through it and explain it. And we've even gone as far as being on the phone with them because they said, well, we did call and they said they do provide it. This is where education even goes to the insurances and these people who are sharing benefits, and things with their customer base. And person did say, well, no, it is covered, but then you look at the outline and the fine print and it says services provided by an RN, and that's frustrating because, these families already have so much to deal with and they're already mostly overwhelmed. A lot of them are still working full-time jobs or helping to raise children still. And, they're just looking for that trusted resource, like for Papa's sake, where, okay, you're giving me good information and you're making it more easy to understand, right? So that's tremendous, Becky. What do you think is one of the most common myths about home care that you have found?
I hear horror stories from other people that come from other agencies
Right.
about theft, about abuse. And so people automatically think they group caregivers into a bucket. We have some of the most phenomenal caregivers. I can count on my hand how many times I had to open up our liability insurance claims, and it was not for anything like that. It was for accidental things because life happens. But I think understanding that there's really good people out there that really want to make a difference, and it's all about how the agency hires people and the background that they do on their team. And that's a really good question to ask your agency
Right.
is what kind of screening do you do on your caregivers? Because the stories I hear, and I get why that I get why people think this often of the term caregivers, but that's not the case here with our team. We have some amazing people that a lot are in nursing school, getting their CNA degree. I mean, there's such a wide array of caregivers and why they're doing what they're doing. And they really are such amazing people.
That is one of the unfortunate things, I think, in the industry as a whole, where, again, non-licensed states, it's kind of like the Wild West. Anybody can work in home care, anybody can say they're a home care business, and you just hope that people doing that, are good. They are taking the proper protections and, coverages out and doing things the way they should. Because if there is an accident, that family is kind of left holding the bag, and those aren't questions a lot of them tend to ask, and, so we're big advocates that nationwide, everybody should be regulated and it should be enforced where, we are all under the same umbrella. So we operate with our family business as such, right? To the best of our ability. We can't go through a registry like you can in Illinois, but we do the background checks, the screenings, orientation, the training, and we have a minimum expectation of 2 years of professional experience. Or there are cases where somebody took care of a child for 25 years, and they have a heart of gold and the compassion and the know-how, and we'll put them through certain specified trainings. But like you said, you hear these stories where people find out, oh, it's not as advertised, and I think it doesn't just taint caregivers as a whole. I think it also taints the industry as a whole, and that's the unfortunate part that, companies like yours and ours, we try to combat that and, show that, no, this is just like a hospital or a nursing home. You're going to have good apples sometimes and you're going to have bad apples. And it's, everybody's job to try to get rid of the bad and just keep the good. But occasionally, people mislead you, and it's just unfortunate. And then good companies like yours and ours, we're there to help them, the families, pick up the pieces.
Absolutely. And I think from our boutique approach, we can weed out those bad apples pretty quickly.
Right.
People will say what they think you want to hear.
Right.
Great. But it's really the first 2 weeks, we really get a good sense of really who you truly are. And we're really heavily involved with checking in on their side and the client side, physically and verbally.
Right.
We are checking in to make sure that what you said is really aligning with
Exactly.
the truth.
Yeah.
And we'll weed them out really quickly.
And, in any good company should do that, right? I mean, we tell families once you're on, you're onboarded, because we explain it, because we have, the calls where can you send a caregiver tonight for, 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. We don't know this person. We don't, they're just calling, and, and you politely explain to them, this is a lot like going to the doctor the first time. You can't call a doctor that you've never been to and get a prescription over the phone, right? You have to fill out paperwork. There's drug allergies, food allergies, medical history, list of current medications. All sorts of things go into this because we have to prepare the staff before they ever step foot in that home to know what the expectations are and what to be on the lookout for, what the needs are. And then one of our case managers will then meet with them, brief them over all of that before they go. And then a case manager will go with them to that home for the first visit. And it's a good process because that way everybody knows what's expected of each other. And it's a comfort level also, not only for the family, but for that staff. We have staff that have been with us for, years and years and years. And the saying around here is, even though you've been here for years, this home is your first day on the job, because every home is different. Every person is different. And so, it's really a good process, and it helps a lot with, that transition for families. Because if they've never had a home care provider or people in their home, that's an undertaking for a lot of people, and it's a comfort level too.
Yeah. And I think what you're doing there, and we do the same thing, is that support for the caregiver too.
Right.
Goes such a long way. And it's probably why you have I would imagine you have pretty low turnover, and your staff probably stays with you because they feel supported, they feel respected. You're not just throwing them into homes, which can't possibly be a good experience for anybody.
Right. So Becky, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges families face when they're looking to find a home care company that fits their specific needs? What would you recommend to them?
I'd recommend being flexible and being open-minded. Unfortunately, we still deal with a lot of racism. No fault of their own. We grew up in very different generations, but it's our job to help educate. Again, if that comes up right away, I've had to say to families, so let me get this straight. I want to clarify. You would rather have somebody of this ethnicity versus somebody with 20 years that was a nurse in another country, that experience level, who's an amazing, wonderful, kind person. You'd still rather have person X with no experience because of their color. And I have to have that conversation, but I think being open-minded and trusting your agency is really key. If you trust your agency and you know the whys behind who they're sending and why they're sending, hopefully it'll open your mind up a little bit, but we have to have those kind of uncomfortable conversations still. Um, being open-minded to the schedule. And again, it's our job to understand the why. I always talk about the why behind everything we do. So why is the client requesting this schedule? You got to understand all of that before you can go in and start scheduling. So knowing, and then we'll say, well, where is our flexibility in here for the right person? At the end of the day, it's always going to be for the right person. If we can get somebody stable who's a good fit for all of these reasons, are you open to starting maybe a half hour later than you ideally wanted? Because you're going to have a longer tenure with this person potentially. So I think those are really important things to consider with any new client once we're onboarding.
Okay.
And for us, we say this from the beginning, we say this with our caregivers and with our clients, we're going to be transparent with you. If we think the schedule is going to be too challenging because we want to be realistic, we're going to be really open about that.
Yeah, and I think that's important, for us and for yourself. It sounds like, transparency and being truthful right from the get-go is such a key part of that foundation of trust, not only for the families, but for the staff. Like we explained, if we're not honest with you now, you're not going to believe us later, right? And, I think that is such a key component for that, strong foundation of trust and, really confidence, not only, like I said, for the families, but for the staff as well. Let's talk about financial resources and options. Are there financial resources available to help families? Because again, like we talked about previously, we get calls all the time about Medicare and my Blue Cross Blue Shield or my HAP plan and different things. And, we kind of go through it. But what do you share with families as far as the financial resources available for funding, home care services?
So obviously long-term care insurance, if they have it, usually they know if they have it at this point, but always ask if you're the child or the spouse, ask if they invested in long-term care insurance at some point. Hopefully they did, but long-term care insurance is a huge tool that a lot of clients use. Also, VA benefits are a really great one too. The nice thing about VA benefits is they also get passed to the spouse if the spouse had passed away. So definitely you want to look into your local VA and dig a little bit. Also, there are some grants available to families. So just here, we're in Cook County, in Lake County, there are some organizations that have grants for families in need too. There's also some out here. There's places like Catholic Charities that will help too. So I always encourage people to work with a social worker or a case manager who I can always make some recommendations for as well, but they will also be helpful in guiding them in terms of the grants and the additional, because every location is going to be different, but definitely looking into the community resources available too.
Okay, wonderful. And what would you say is one lesson that really sticks out in your position that has taught you really that you think everyone should learn or know about?
I think it's really important to, and I've said this before with you, but to understand the why. That goes for caregivers. So if they're getting moved off a schedule, they need to understand the why and the story. It's not just a quick, hey, we're taking you off the schedule. Thank you. There's usually a reason. Maybe the schedule's changing and it doesn't fit with their availability anymore. Or maybe the skill level is changing and we need somebody with more experience. But explaining the why, and don't just don't assume that people don't want that level of information, because that's how you help build your trust.
Right.
Same with clients. If you have to move a caregiver off the schedule, maybe their babysitting needs, their caregiving needs changed on their side. Their babysitter is no longer available. Or maybe their car broke down and they no longer have a reliable transportation. There's always a why. And if you tell a client, so-and-so is being moved off your schedule with no further explanation, you're really going to lose some trust.
Exactly. Exactly. And once you lose it, it's very hard to regain it, right? And
Yeah, you're not going to regain it. And for us, we're transparent, we're honest
right.
to a fault. If you don't like what we have to say, I would rather be honest with you than have
Exactly.
to keep track of what we're telling people. It's not in our way. I expect that same from you though.
Exactly. And we haven't mentioned it here in this call, but previously you had used the phrase or the name Papa's Pearls. Why don't you explain to us that the reasons you call your caregivers Papa's Pearls?
Sure. Part of it's because of that notion of what we talked about earlier with the term caregiver. It doesn't always carry the light of what they truly do, which is such a fierce and needed role in our society. But Papa, who was my grandfather, who I adored, both my kids are named after him. He was such a pillar in my childhood and my life still today. Um, we came up with the term Papa's Pearls for our caregivers because you have to shuck a lot of oysters to find that perfect pearl. So we probably get hundreds of calls for services or hundreds of calls for caregivers every week. We only hire a fraction of those people that call. We have a very high standard of of who we're looking for, but every pearl is unique.
Mhm.
But pearls are beautiful. And so that's why I went with Papa's Pearls over the term caregivers.
I like that. And that's really nice. And I like that you're honoring your grandfather. I'm sure that, he would be enormously proud and just it's a nice way to carry on his memory and to spread his memory and, impact that he had on your life and your family's life. What would a typical day, and I know this is a loaded question because there's not always necessarily a typical day for every caregiver or every Papa's Pearl that would be identical because everybody's different and their needs are different, their care plans are different, their routines are different. But how would you describe a typical day for one of Papa's Pearls?
So to what you just said, there really is no typical day. Every day is most likely going to be a little bit different. But what I can say to that is every day you should be the light in that client's day. So while we can't change the situation our clients are in, we can change the way they look at their day. And so we always say we are that one piece of sunshine. We are that one light that they have to look forward to
Mhm.
every day. So while some days they might have doctor's appointments or it might be a bathing day, so they might be showering the client. Every day is going to have some consistency because that's why they hired us. But the one thing that will stay the same in their schedule is that their goal every day is to put a smile on their client's face.
Wonderful. And let's talk about Papa's Pearls. What are the typical requirements or things that you look for and kind of walk us through that in order for somebody to become a Papa's Pearl?
So regardless of if you have, and we also prefer 2 years of caregiving experience, but there's also those people that don't have that. And that's okay for us because those could be great companions. Sometimes we're just going playing games with our client, taking them to doctor's appointments. So you don't necessarily need to have a ton of experience, but you need that heart. But regardless if you're coming into this with 10 years caregiving or none, you still have to go through 8 hours of state mandated training. Every year, we go through 4 hours twice a year of in-service training as well. So they keep up with that 8 hours annually. They do get drug tested on site. We reserve the right to drug test throughout their tenure with us. They need to give us professional references. We do not accept personal. Um, we look at their driving record as well. We're looking for things that are a history of anything dangerous. So obviously, we all get tickets, things happen, but we're looking for anything dangerous. So DUIs, a history of accidents, anything that could put our clients in danger. And they have to clear our background check, which is through the Illinois Department of Public Health. And then we do, on top of it, some other background checks too, just to make sure that there really isn't anything that would come up.
Okay. What, Becky, what would you say are 3 tips you would give to families who are searching for a home care company? What would be your top 3?
Do your research. Even if we're the first call and they say, I want to work with you, I say, please call some other agencies. You need to know what options are available for you out there. So do your research, ask questions. When people don't ask us questions, I tend to get a little bit worried. Ask to see our liability insurance with certificate. Ask to talk to some references of ours, of current clients, of past clients. And then I also think it's really important to ask about something I always coach people on when they're calling us is ask about the caregivers, ask about the caliber of caregivers, and ask about the process of hiring. A lot of the rates are dictated on what they're paying, what companies are paying caregivers. So if our rate is a little bit higher, ask us where that money is going. It should be a completely transparent experience for the client. So I want them to ask those questions when they're starting that process with us.
Okay. And what would you say for viewers and listeners that might be sitting here watching or listening to this and thinking, okay, I don't know if it's time, but maybe in the future, what are the signs families should be looking for that it might indicate you might need to start looking into, professional home care services?
I mean, every family is going to be different with that question, but I think if you're starting to, as a child or a spouse of the person you're concerned about, if you're starting to spend more time worrying than you are enjoying your time with your loved one, then it's going to be time to start moving on this. And I always tell families, if they're not sure, start out small. Start with 1 day a week. Start with 1 day a week, minimal hours, just to start getting the client comfortable with the idea of having somebody there. And then it can gradually build. With any relationship, it takes time to build that trust and to show that value to the client. So I would always say, why don't we start out with something small to start, just get the client a taste of what this could be, and let us show the value, and then it can gradually grow from there.
And what if a family hires for Papa's sake and the first 2 weeks, the person receiving the care just does not like it? Do they have to continue using it, or can they discontinue service?
They can discontinue. We ask for 2 weeks notice.
So there's no long-term commitments. And oftentimes too, we have found where that person that the family thought there's no way they'll ever go for it ends up really enjoying it, and they can see how it's going to benefit them.
Yeah. And it's again, it's getting them a taste of the value. So sometimes they don't realize we can do things like the laundry, the light housekeeping, the errands, and take that off their plate.
Right.
And once they see, oh, this is nice, it tends to stick. But it does, especially with the resistant clients, it takes time to build that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Becky, I really appreciate your time today and for sharing for Papa's sake and the wonderful work you guys are doing. You hadn't mentioned it, so I will mention it for you, but you were recently awarded the #1 home care provider by Homecare Pulse, I believe, correct? So congratulations on that. And, you're a testament to the wonderful work and benefits that, home care services being done the right way can provide families and their loved ones.
Thank you. Yeah, we were honored to receive that. And I think the great thing about that award was that feedback came directly from our clients and our caregivers. So it wasn't just an award that was picked. We actually earned it based on the ratings we got from our team and our clients.
Well deserved. And, congratulations again. We will have links to everything for Papa's sake in the show notes and in our summaries. And we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can leave us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to thank Becky Reel from For Papa's Sake Home Care for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.